Let me tell you about Richard Carranza. And I want to tell you his story is the story of the American dream, if ever there was one. His grandparents came to the United States from Mexico, settled in Tucson, Arizona. His parents, working class Americans, hard working people. His dad, a sheet metal worker, his mom, a hairdresser. Humble origins, but they believed in education. Also, were very, very proud of who they were and their heritage. And Richard grew up speaking Spanish at home and learned English for the first time in public school. Now, Richard, I didn't say this to you before, but I'm going to give you the highest compliment I could possibly give you, because the person in my life who went through that exact same experience was my mother, Maria. And she was the child of immigrants, but she was born here, but never spoke English until she walked into a school building for the first time. And she turned out pretty good. And so I have a special feeling for English language learners, but what's so beautiful about Richard's story is from the moment he started to experience our public schools, in this case in Tucson, he blossomed. He was off to a great, great future. Richard, in everything he's done, has been devoted to children, and he has been a change agent through his work. And you'll hear when he speaks how much he has a profound understanding of the work of education and what it can do to change the lives of kids, and how much we have to keep changing the way we educate to create a fairer society. He did this work in Tucson, he did this work in Las Vegas, in San Francisco, and then most recently in Houston. He has been a teacher, for many years was a teacher, a principal, an administrator, and a superintendent of two of the most prominent school systems in America. What we saw in San Francisco, Richard was the deputy superintendent for 3 years, and then the superintendent for 4 more, so 7 years continuous. And what we saw in San Francisco was remarkable as we were doing our research. And I talked to a number of people in San Francisco who had worked closely with Richard, and the response was uniformly positive. The beliefs he brings to this work played out very deeply in San Francisco. His focus was on increasing equity. His focus was overcoming the divisions of the past, and at the same time creating academic rigor. In San Francisco, graduation rates increased substantially on Richard's watch. Test scores increased substantially compared to other cities in California. He also did a very impressive job of working to close the achievement gap. And a lot of the biggest increases in test scores were among Latino and African American students, including many of whom were low income. So he's had a proven record as someone who can get results while moving an equity agenda, and that certainly is so powerful to us when we think about our core vision of equity and excellence. When he went on to Houston, he knew he was going into a very tough situation, a school district that had been historically underfunded. I will say this gently, a state government that perhaps did not invest all it could have in education. Richard went into a tough situation with that same equity agenda for Houston. And he was just getting into the work when the worst natural disaster in the history of Houston struck with Hurricane Harvey. When you look at Richard Carranza's leadership in Houston during Hurricane Harvey, you see extraordinary strength, an amazing ability to stay calm despite the magnitude of the crisis. He is one of the people who helped get Houston back on its feet. And he determined very early on that the school district had to lead the way, and audaciously determined that schools would reopen 2 weeks after the disaster. Again, we all saw the footage from Houston. It was devastating, the worst flooding the city had ever known. But Richard Carranza said, we can't become whole again unless our schools are working, and for so many families, unless the schools were working, the rest of their lives wouldn't be working. So he got those schools up and running. And he also determined that the schools would be a source of help and support for families in all neighborhoods. So he made sure that kids could get 3 meals a day in those schools in the midst of that crisis. He made sure that if family members needed meals, they could come to the schools and get them, because he knew that he, as a leader, had an opportunity to serve and to get something done because of the sheer magnitude of the school district. He could get something done for Houston that very few others could. He also did a great job of bringing in outside support and outside resources to help the children of Houston during that crisis. So I want to commend him for those extraordinary achievements. I also want to say, as a man who has shown a lot of courage as a leader, let's face it, going to the state of Texas means you're going to hit some political headwinds for sure. But Richard Carranza said the same things in Houston, Texas that he said in San Francisco, California. He stood up for the rights of LGBT students. He stood up for the rights of transgender students. He believed every child deserved a great education regardless of what zip code they lived in. And that's the way he has lived wherever he's been. I will tell you that I've heard his passion, and I've talked to people who've served with him. He is an educator's educator. And I know that the extraordinary men and women who work for the Department of Education will quickly sense that he is a kindred soul and someone who's walked a mile in their shoes. And he's someone who understands our children and our parents. When you think about his life and the life of his family, this is someone who every day will relate to the kids he serves and will be able to communicate with the parents who care so deeply about their children's future. And that gives me tremendous confidence.